Hi everyone and welcome to NameHero. I'm Ryan, the founder and CEO. In this video tutorial, I want to show you how to migrate your cPanel accounts over to InterWorx. So we just recently announced that the InterWorx control panel is free on all of our VPS hosting and cloud dedicated servers. So if I scroll down to our website here, you can see our VPS hosting and our cloud dedicated. So if you purchase either one of these services with us, you can migrate over your existing cPanel accounts into InterWorx. Now, we have said for our existing VPS customers, if you're currently using cPanel and Web Host Manager, and you would rather use InterWorx and not deal with cPanel's new licensing structure, we can do that migration for you. So we can actually convert that VPS to InterWorx, and so that way you retain all the same IP addresses and other settings that you already have. Now, this video tutorial is for those that have created a new VPS or a new cloud dedicated server and are wanting to move over accounts from their existing VPSs or dedicated servers elsewhere. And likewise, those that are on our basic hosting or our reseller hosting and you're looking to spin up a VPS or cloud dedicated with InterWorx, you can move over your accounts in these methods. Now, of course, at NameHero, if you're upgrading from web hosting to reseller hosting to a VPS or dedicated, we're more than willing to help you with your migration and also for others out there as well. But I did want to get this video out to show you kind of what you're looking for and how it's done. If you're like me, maybe you want to do things yourself. I'm kind of a control freak, even though I try not to be, but I like to know at least how to do it. And sometimes I would just rather do it myself. That way I know how to do it and bring customers in with ease. So you have many options when you're going to be moving over to the InterWorx control panel, and thankfully it's pretty simple. So in this tutorial, I'm going to mainly show how to use the interface inside of NodeWorx, which is just allowing you to enter in the values of your old server into InterWorx and then import that way. There are command line tools, and I might highlight one of those really quickly, but I'm actually not going to demonstrate that in this video. Perhaps I'll do another video for that. But to get started, I'm going to navigate to my client area, and I've got two test servers. I've got one with cPanel, and I've got the other one with InterWorx. And so we're going to be pulling the cPanel accounts from that into InterWorx from that test server. So let me get them loaded up here. I'll start here with my cPanel server, and we'll use this dedicated server with InterWorx. All right, so the first thing I want to do is go into Web Host Manager. And at NameHero, remember, these are temporary links. These don't go to the host name. So, of course, if you get this connection not secure, that's because it's a self-signed SSL, and it is, so you can proceed. All right, so I'm going to log into cPanel. Sorry, I'm going to grab this password in my other window. Move it in here. And paste. Log in. All right, so the first thing I like to do is just take a quick overview of what I'm moving over so I have an idea. So I'll go to List Accounts, and you can see I've got just a bunch of kind of demos here. These are not all real domains. I just created these, and so I'd have some test purposes. And I put some data in them, not a ton. If you're moving over a website, and I always say, a gig or more, then that's a little bit more of a complicated migration, just because, especially if you're trying to do it through the browser, you could get timeout errors and all that. So if you do have a site like that, then you're not going to want to use the mass transfer feature, or you can, but you're going to do that account separately. So I'll talk about that as we go along the way. But the first thing I do like to do is look at my accounts I plan on migrating over. And first, obviously just look at the domain to see, what's moving. I like to look at the IP address. Are all the accounts I'm moving over on the same IP, or does, some of them have their unique IP, a dedicated IP? If that's the case, if some of my customers are on shared and some of them have dedicated IPs, then I might want to migrate them over to a dedicated IP. So then I need to look at my InterWorx server and see, well, do I have multiple IPs? And of course, if you've purchased with us here at NameHero, then you can purchase those IPs from us, or you can do it when you first spin up your server. So I like to look at that. I like to look at the username because sometimes InterWorx only takes the first 8 characters. I've seen it work both ways, though. I've seen it take the the full, and I've seen it work 8. So I'm not really sure the difference in that, and I'll continue to do some research and see why that happens specifically. But that is important just to kind of look at. And I have some that are longer and some that are shorter. And we'll see if we run into any errors when I do this test migration. Next, I like to look at the PHP version of the entire server I'm moving from, as well as each account. So in Web Host Manager, if I type in multi-PHP, you can see it under software, my multi-PHP manager. I bring it up here, and I want to first look at the system default version. So it takes a second to load. And that's PHP 7.1 is what this specific server is using. So that's good because I know I have this on my InterWorx server. And then I can go down here and see what each website itself is using. Now, if I'm a reseller web host, it's possible that some of my customers have selected their own version. So we want to make sure when we restore them that they're on the same version of PHP that they're coming from so it doesn't break their website. Now, the InterWorx migration tools will try to match all this stuff up. But still, it's important to kind of have a note and to check it too yourself manually. Automated tools are great, but there's nothing more satisfactory than doing a manual check. So you can see all of these accounts are using PHP 7.1, so it should be pretty straightforward in my case. So for you, if you're watching this, keep these screens loaded up, take a screenshot, or just make some notes so you can make sure when you're bringing the sites over that everything does restore properly. All right. So now we can pull up our InterWorx server. So let's go over to it. cPanel and InterWorx. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is go into NodeWorx, and NodeWorx is InterWorx's kind of version of Web Host Manager. So it's the master control panel or the reseller control panel, and that's where I want to do these transfers. So I need to log in. Once again, I'm going to switch over to my screen here and grab my password. Hope I have the right one here. So with NodeWorx, I use my email to log in, and I use my password. Paste. Hopefully I didn't change it. Nope, I didn't. All right. So when you first load up NodeWorx, it looks like this. All of these are minimized. So this is the main control panel for NodeWorx. So you can see it's similar to Web Host Manager in the fact that it manages all your sites, and it's where you go set up and bring in sites and all that. So the first thing I want to do is go to SiteWorks, go to this menu and click on Import. Okay, so this is going to show my different options. So I can import from a single backup, or I can do a mass transfer. So, if I'm moving a lot of accounts over, I like to start with the mass transfer to see, if I can move over as much of it as possible, as quickly as possible. I have found, from my experience in NodeWorx and InterWorx in general, the single account, it works really good. Where if I get errors on the mass transfer, I then try the single account transfer, and I've seen the single account transfer work when times the mass transfer does not. So that's what we're going to start with. And also you'll notice they have a special import tool if you're using Plesk 9 or 10 or 9, 10, or 11. But again, this example has to deal with cPanel and Web Host Manager, so that's what I'm going to assume you're trying to accomplish watching this video. So I want to do import mass transfer, and then it gives me some options. So the first thing I need is my host name for my current server, the one I'm migrating from. So if I head over to Web Host Manager, this host name is basically the main IP address of the server. Now, you can use, if you're using a host name here, the name of the server, you can try that and see if you get in. I just like to use the IP just so I know that for sure the accounts are coming from this server. And it also saves sometimes if you run into an SSL validation error, it can get kind of frustrating. So I like to use the IP for my host name, but that's kind of up to you how you want to do it. But that's just what I recommend doing to minimize the chance of getting an error. Now, this is going to SSH into that server, into our current server. So there's a couple things you need to check. One, if you've customized the SSH port. So by default, SSH listens on port 22. So if you have not customized that, and if you don't know, then most likely you have not. But then if you have, you need to define that. So you would define the port by putting a colon and then the port number. So if you've changed it to say 1234, then you put the colon and then 1234 here. By default, it's going to try 22. So just keep that in mind, because if you get an error, if you try this without this colon, and it's going to try port 22, but if you've changed it, it's not going to connect. So keep that in mind. Likewise, too, is if you've changed this port and you don't have the port open correctly in your firewall, you might also get an error. And this needs to be in both firewalls, the NodeWorx firewall as well as your Web Host Manager firewall. If you run into a lot of issues with connecting, you might just want to temporarily disable the firewall on both servers. And to do that, it's really quick. You would just go into first your Web Host Manager. And this is assuming you're using CSF Firewall, which is what we use at NameHero. You could go into here, and you can see this one's actually disabled already. So it's just Firewall Disable down here towards the bottom. Actually, let me just search for it. Firewall Disable. So you could just click this and temporarily disable it while you're doing this. Again, I don't like to leave this off long, but if you're running into connection errors, I would just try to disable this here. And then also on your InterWorx server, if you go to Configure Server Plugins, you'll bring up CSF here. And you can see it's running right now, but if I had an error or had an issue connecting, I could also disable it here. So keep that in mind. I know that's one common thing we run across. All right, so for my server, I just have the default SSH, so I'm going to delete the custom port deal. For cPanel servers, the username for root is root. Again, if you've customized or changed that, then you'd want to alter that here. If you have the different user that you use to SSH in instead of root, then you should use that here. But it should have root privileges. This is going to be my root password. And so, by default at NameHero, this is going to be whichever password you're using here. So if you click Login Details, it'll be the username root and your password will be here. You can only view this in the NameHero interface, though, if you have two-factor enabled. If you do not, then you'll need to enable it, or you should have that when you created the VPS or server. All right, so let me go over here and grab that again from my other window. I make them really hard, obviously, so I keep them in another window to copy and paste. All right, so I've got my host name, which I like to use as the primary IP of the server, the username root, and then the root password. Now I need to select cPanel as it's the control panel type. And now I can query accounts. And sometimes it does that. I don't know why. It refreshes it, then I have to click it again. So if that happens to you, click it twice for it to come up. And it's important to note, too, this queries the accounts. It doesn't just start bringing stuff over. Okay, so now it connected successfully, and you can see I've got my accounts here from the other server. And if I want to just verify this really quick, I can go into cPanel and go to List Accounts. And you can see here, 12 accounts are in here. And it's picked up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's picked up all 12. Okay, so the one it will not let me is my primary domain. It says domain already exists. So if the domain already exists on your or on your InterWorx server, the one with NodeWorx, then you have to do a single account import. So you can still, if your primary domain's key.iots, which it was when we created this server, and if that's the primary domain for your other one, or just a domain on your other server, which you can see it's here, and you've already created it, you can import this, but you cannot use the mass transfer tool. So I'll show you how to do that one as well. All right, so from here, we can't do that one. We can do these other ones because I have not yet created them. And again, if maybe you kind of jumped the gun and you created SiteWorks accounts for these, but you wanted to migrate them and they don't have data, you could actually just delete them. And you could even delete your primary if you wanted to, but that's up to you. So I want to show you both ways, because as long as a domain or account's not created, then you can bring these in with this tool. Okay, so now we're just going to kind of look over here. This is the username from cPanel, and this is the domain. You have this field called reseller. And so by default, server admin, and this might be your name if you've changed your NodeWorx username, this is kind of equivalent to cPanel's root user. So this just assumes that, I'm the root user and I own all of these accounts. Now, if I'm a web host, for example, and I have resellers on my platform, I would want to make sure that I'm assigning the accounts to whoever owns them. So if they are created by a reseller inside of cPanel, I want to make sure that those are assigned correctly. So you can do the default option, it's going to import. So it's going to import whoever owns them currently. or you can hard select the reseller or the root user. So, most of the time import works just fine on these. The database server, so InterWorx is very friendly as far as having multiple servers, meaning if you want to have your database on a completely separate VPS or dedicated, you can add it inside of NodeWorx. Now on this server specifically, there's the database server is just on the local host, so that's the only option I have. Here at NameHero, we don't use IPv6 yet. We will eventually, but for now, there's nothing, so don't worry about that. Now we have our IP addresses. And this specific server I've created only has one IP, and it's the shared IP. And if I go back to my cPanel list of listing accounts, you can see all of my accounts use the same IP. So while the IP address is going to change, it's all going to be a shared IP. Now again, if you have customers that have dedicated IPs, you might need to make sure that you assign them one when you import them in. So just keep that in mind. And again, if you're with us here at NameHero, you can add that when you're creating the server, or you can contact our sales team and we can definitely get more IPs added for you. Okay, so now this is IPv6 pool, and this is for the actual address, and so there's none on here. Okay, now SSL in use, if the account already has an SSL certificate, NodeWorx will actually try to bring that over as well. Now mine are just created on the fly and I don't have them set up, so they all say no. But the good news is NodeWorx actually has Let's Encrypt installed too. So if you're using like the free SSL, the free and auto SSL, it's going to try to bring those over if they're active, but you can always just recreate them inside of InterWorx. So I don't really pay a lot of attention to that. Now, if one of your domains has a premium SSL certificate, let's say an extended validation certificate that the customer's purchased or if you've purchased, you'll try to bring that over as well. It'll actually take your private keys and all that stuff. So you can keep that in mind. It's going to try to bring over everything. You're not just your files, but your emails, your SSL, your I mentioned email accounts, but all the features of the current cPanel. It's going to try to bring everything. Okay, so now this looks good. Now, when I went back earlier, I was talking about the size. So, these are all very small accounts. So I can mass import, all of them. It shouldn't be any issues. But if you have ones that are, a gig or larger, I would like to recommend that you do those by themselves, or even 500 megabytes or more. Maybe just kind of look at your accounts and try the larger ones first by themselves. So, for example, if like demo cPanel 1, if this was like a gig or more, or even 500 megabytes or more, I could just click this and try to import this one alone to make sure I don't run into any timeouts. So keep that in mind when you're doing this, or even if you try to do them all at once and something fails, you might want to come back and try that. But since mine are low usage in space, I'm just going to try all these and we'll see what happens, and then if we run into any errors, we'll go from there. So I'm going to check if I click this here, check all, and for some reason my browser doesn't want to check them, so let's just check them all manually. Not sure what's going on with that. So check them all manually. And once again, my primary domain's already created, so it's not going to be useful in this tool. We'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so now these are selected. I like all the defaults. And now I'll click this drop down and you can see to import. So as soon as I click this, it's going to start to try to import all of these. Click import. All right, I got to confirm actually. Do you want to import them? Yes, or okay. Okay, so now it's going to run and just kind of do its thing. Again, the larger the account is, the longer it's going to take. And you can see it's kind of batching them. So it looks like it's starting off with 2, and then it's going to hit the others. So what this does is it goes in and creates a backup, and then it creates the account. And you can see I already have one failure there, a default cPanel 12. And again, I expect some failures, mass transferring. Sometimes you run into issues, and we'll talk about how to resolve those as well. So let's just go ahead and just see what happens here, see what gets brought in, and then we'll go through the ones that failed. And the important thing too is these logs don't disappear, so you can always go back, and look at your logs. But you can see demo cPanel 1, that account is successful, so that's good. This one says increased bandwidth quota. There was a problem validating the form, so error. So I'm not sure what happened here, why it did not create it. This error seems kind of vague. I almost would need to go Google that or look it up, because it says it was trying to do everything, but it didn't. So let's just look. I guess right now, while this does its thing, we can just go take a look in cPanel and see what the difference was on this one. So demo 12, It was a basic demo URL. Created the same date, owned by root. You know, I'm not sure why it had a problem because it looks like it's got pretty much all the standard features. If I go to modify account, let's take a look at that. See if maybe there was an option that threw that amiss. The package was default. Everything looks unlimited. You know, yeah, I don't see anything that would have caused that to not work unless, you know, it maybe had some issues bringing in that username. Maybe it was close to this one. So anyways, we'll go back and look at that one. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 successes. We have another issue here with NameHero tester. And this one looks like, so the bandwidth quota was the issue here. Increased slave domain quota. That was an issue there. So again, not quite sure what those errors mean. Please see the details below. This couldn't create the SiteWorx account. Okay, so that's all right. Again, we'll go through those. But let's just continue on our mass import. I mean, 2 failures out of all these is not bad. And just one more left. And again, these tools really help you save some time. You know, I know at NameHero, whenever doing a migration, when you can use this tool, it certainly is a lot easier than manually doing any of it. Okay, so you can see most everything moved over except for a couple. So let's first look at the ones that did come over successfully. Let's see here. I've got one specifically. I created some data I wanted to look at. So trying to think of which one. I think, okay, Hero Servers 432. Let's take a look at that account. So I want to keep this window open just so I have these logs so we can go back to the others. But if I open SiteWorx accounts in another window, I can then see the accounts on the server now. So you can see these accounts have all been created on my server. So now, so for this one, this is the one I'm going to look at, Hero Servers 432. If I click SiteWorx, this logs me in to that specific user panel. So again, this is the equivalent to cPanel. So just to show a comparison, I'm going to go into Web Host Manager, list accounts, and my Hero servers, we're going to go into cPanel. Trying to get another window. Okay, so just comparison. Here's cPanel. Here's SiteWorx. So this is, you know, kind of the comparison of what the customer would see or the user or whoever for that specific domain. First thing I like to look at is just kind of compare. If I see this here, I can see like there's the email boxes, for example, one. So if I click it, I can see Postmaster, just a defaults. Well, let's look over here at email. Was there anything specifically set up? No. So just the default box was there, so I don't have to worry about that. Let's look at forwards. I didn't know if I put any forwards in here or not. Okay, I did have an email forward in here, so let's see if that came over. If I go to email aliases, yes, so that came over as well. So, you know, I like to kind of just compare them one by one. Did everything come over that said came over? So in this case, there was one forward and it came over. Next, let's look at MySQL databases. If I go to MySQL, I like to look at these. This was the database we had in there. So we can simply copy this. And we can go over here to databases. And it looks right here. So sometimes I'll use my find in my browser just to make sure that name matches. So see, it brought that database over as the same name. If I go to manage users, did it bring the user name? And my username is the same. So if I look in here, and yes, the username is the same. So look, yeah, it brought it over. Good. So we can confirm that my emails are over, my databases is over. We always like to look too at add-on domains, or even subdomains. Add-on domains. I don't have any on this one. So on InterWorx, an add-on domain is called a pointer. So if I go into, well, I don't even have the option here because since I didn't have any, this specific user actually doesn't have privilege for add-on domains. So it's not even in there. If they did, there would be an option under domains for pointer, and we might run across another account like that. Okay, so the next thing we'll look at, though, since we know that that stuff got brought over, is let's take a look at the files just for the heck of it. So File Manager, and cPanel, we'll go to File Manager 2. Now, this is one thing I don't really care for in SiteWorx is their file manager. I just don't like the look of it. I mean, look, this, I don't know, I just don't really like the way this looks compared to cPanel. cPanel looks a lot cleaner, but anyways, it is what it is. All right, so if I go into public HTML, you can see this was a WordPress site. And so if I go into here, public HTML, okay, my WordPress files are there. So yeah, the files came over. All right, so right now everything looks good. You know, the files are over, the databases and emails are over. Okay, so I want to go into now, let's take a look at Softaculous. And this is something maybe a lot of people might overlook. So Softaculous is the app installer. And if you use that to install WordPress, you might want to have this interface as well, because Softaculous comes free at NameHero on all of our hosting packages. So whether you have a VPS or dedicated or shared or reseller, you have Softaculous. And it's a good tool to make sure WordPress is installed with ease, but also keeps it updated. So again, now inside of SiteWorks, I've got to agree to the license. So agree. Now you can notice in WordPress that I don't see any. So if I go to Overview, I don't see any installs. If I go in cPanel, close out a file manager, and I go to Softaculous, I see my domain. So I would like to have this show up in here. And since it didn't come with the migration, I need to put it in there. So I need to click Import and select these fields here. So especially if you have multiple WordPress installs, then you need to get specific on these. So if I go into cPanel, I can click this pencil and make sure this stuff lines up. So the URL, this is the first thing I can look at. Let's make sure we match that. So we're going to use HTTP, and then we just have one domain, and there's no directory. So, you know, if there was a directory on this URL, for example, /WP, then we would want to make sure that we put WP in there, or WP, you know, so we can navigate or differentiate between the different installs. But you can see it's optional. It's going to check, but it's to import software only installed in just the root domain, leave it empty. All right, so I'm gonna click import and see what it finds. Good, found it. Okay, so it looks like it imported. Now if I go to return overview, now this next step is a little bit important. So if I go here and look, you know, everything looks good. But if I click this pencil icon, you can see and compare them. First, my directory did change because the directory structure of InterWorx is different than cPanel. So on cPanel, it's home, username, public HTML. And InterWorx, it's home, username, domain, HTML. This is how it came over. So that's different. So, you know, if I'm just importing WordPress, this is fairly easy. But if I've hard-coded any of this in my scripts, I need to make sure that I'm changing that over. But for WordPress, this is fine. The URL looks good, and database and user, this looks good because it all matches up. Remember, we verified that. Now, the default password, you know, that came over. So I'm not going to show this in the video just for security. I guess I can because I'm going to delete it anyways. You can see the password was this, password's that. Okay, that brought the same password over. Database hosts. Now, this is important. On cPanel, this is localhost. Whoops. On InterWorx, this is not. You have to do this a little differently. And I'm going to show you how to see this. So looking at all this, you know, it does look good, but except for the exception of that. So if I go down here and just save, you're going to see I got an error. The MySQL username and password is wrong because the connection cannot be established. So I need to go update this. You know, I need to fix this so it does work. And this is going to be the case with any of your scripts that are using a MySQL database. So with InterWorx, we need to define, as I mentioned, it differentiates between how databases are handled. For example, if I wanted to have my databases on a separate server, then I would easily do that inside of InterWorx. But for this server, databases are local anyways, but it's just not localhost. So I need to modify my WP config file to reflect this. So from inside of InterWorx, well, actually, I want to go to SiteWorks. So right up here, you can go to Control Panel. We need to go back to File Manager. So we'll go back down here to File Manager. And we need to navigate to where WordPress lives. And it's in public HTML in our WP config file. So I'm going to click that. And this is where all this stuff's hard-coded in. You can see under the database host, it's localhost. But on InterWorx, we need to change this to an IP address, an internal server IP address. So I want to change this from localhost to this. And this is 127.0.0.1. So that's the internal IP for the database server. And then I just want to save it. Okay, now once I've done this, I can go back to Softaculous and click Allow Softaculous to fetch the database details. Let's see if that fixes it for us. The installation details were read successfully. Return to overview. So now if I go back and click my pencil, you can see I see that IP address in there now. So this all connected and we're good. So basically Softaculous, it went ahead and went into the config file and pulled all this in. So now Softaculous is fully functional. So, you know, if I wanted to go back here and go into, you know, my admin area, which this might not work since it's not going to work since I don't have the propagated. But that would take me to my admin area, and then I could use all the features such as, you know, if I wanted to clone it or create a staging area, let's just call it that. I can do that here. You know, in short, Softaculous is now fully functioning just as it was on cPanel. You can see, congratulations, I created a staging area. So now my site's all set. You know, I can clone and create and all that. But the only difference was I needed to go into File Manager and change that WP config file. And likewise, if you're using WHMCS, I know that's a popular piece of software, you would need to edit that config file to reflect the database host. And likewise, if you have scripts that define the directory structure, you need to make sure you edit that as well. And what I mean by that, if I click this pencil, I can see it. This is the new home directory or public HTML. On cPanel, it looked like this. So if I've hard-coded anywhere in any of my config files or scripts, if the structure looks like this, I need to change it to match this. So I just need to make sure that I'm doing that so things work. Because obviously if you don't, then you're going to get some errors and it's going to be a little frustrating. So that's, you know, two things that I've seen during these migrations that sometimes cause some confusion. So if you're getting errors, you know, make sure you're checking that. Next, it's also good to look at the version of PHP. So if I go on my domain to under domains inside of SiteWorks, PHP options, you can click edit and you can see it's on PHP 7.1. I also have the option to upgrade to 7.2, but 7.1 is what it was using before. And I can also verify that in cPanel by going to my cPanel for this domain. Actually, I can get to it from Softaculous. Multi-PHP Manager. And you can see here 7.1. So now we've checked, you know, the databases came over, the files came over, the email forward came over. We had to import Softaculous to be able to read it. We had to modify that config file, and the PHP is good. So now, you know, they look pretty good. You know, look like everything is over. So basically we would want to go through our sites that we've brought over and verify all of this stuff. And, you know, that's why when you're doing mass integrations or mass migrations, it's important that you go through and check things. You know, and I personally don't let myself get too overwhelmed. If I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of accounts or domains, then it's obviously a larger task. But then I would like to say, do that 10 at a time. You know, do 10, see what happens, look at it, go through it, and kind of spread that workload out. I'm really militant about checking stuff once I bring it over, because there's nothing worse than a failed migration. You know, I even like to go in and edit my host file, my local host file, to test it on my computer before I change the name servers. Because obviously, you know, when you import these, they're not going to be live to the internet until you update the name servers. So, you know, an import is an import. You can always delete it and re-import it, or, you know, make modifications and fix it without any downtime. But that handles that. Now let's talk about these failed ones really quick. So demo 12, it failed, and I don't know the reason. You know, this doesn't, to me, I don't know. It looked all the same to me, and this error doesn't really tell me much. It does nothing really kind of aggravate me. So let's do this. Let's go into cPanel and grab default 12's backup. Default 12, we'll go into cPanel. We're going to go to backup. Download a full backup, you can have it, so first you can give it a destination. So, if you want to just send this over to your new server, you could send it via FTP, passive mode FTP, or SCP. And enter in your information to, what the server IP is, the user, the path, the port, and the directory, and this will automatically just send it over. If you have a large backup, this is absolutely what you want to do. You'd want to send this over to a place on your new server. If it's a small account, and again, this one is 47 megabytes, this can be done through your browser. So for mine, I'm going to just do it through the browser because it's easy, but you definitely want to use these other 3 options if you have a large account. So I'm just going to put it in the home directory and download it manually. So you can enter your email here, and this will tell you when it's done, if it's a large one. This is short, so I don't need to do that. Okay, you can see it's in progress. If I refresh it, boom. All right, so I'm just going to download it. It's 10 megabytes compressed. Uncompressed, it's 47 megabytes. So it's small. And so now 3 seconds left. That's actually really slow for the connection I'm on. Okay, so now we have our backup file. So inside of InterWorx, I want to keep this screen up just because I want to, compare it. So I'll go to my other window here and go to Import. And now this time I want to use the single account option. So again, I can do multiple control panels, not just cPanel, but we are concerned with cPanel, so that's what we're going to do. Okay, so when I click Import, I have this little window. The first, it wants me to select the reseller ID. And you can see this is my root account. And that's I don't have any resellers or different root accounts. So that's by default the one it's going to use. And so, that might be your case too. In Web Host Manager, if your accounts, if we go over here and they say reseller owner root, that's the equivalent. All right, so let's click Next. Okay, so we got a reseller ID. Now it wants to know where the backup file is. If you use the option to FTP or SCP this over, you might need to click Use a File Already on the System, and you would define wherever that file is located. So, if you sent it over using one of those methods, you most likely, put a path, or not most likely, you did put a path to where you want to send it to. So you could do it that way. Now, since this is a small 10 megabytes compressed, we can easily upload this to the browser. So I can just browse files. If I go to Downloads, you can see here, I've got some stuff. Mine was, let's see, I got a couple in here. Find the right one. Where did that one go? So mine was called Backup. Where did I put it? There. No, I don't think it was Key Diets. I think it's this one here. Yeah, it was this one here. Yes. All right, so we'll verify that too. So that's the file that I had, the cPanel move file, or the full backup. Control panel type of on cPanel. All right, so now I have the option to select my IP. Again, we're going to use the default. Database servers localhost. Next. Okay, so this takes the backup file and it's going to upload through your browser. Again, if it's really large, it's going to time out. So, for the really big ones, send them over using another method, not try to upload that through your browser. Okay, so now you can see we've got the root account and it uploaded through my browser to right here. So it's kind of this temporary path. So if you're sending stuff, you might want to send your backups to, say, this folder or whatnot. So it's up to you wherever you'd like to send them, but this is where it automatically uploads. Control panel, cPanel, and localhost, so it kind of confirms everything. Now remember, we got an error when we used the mass import. So we're trying this method to see, well, does this one work? Because in my experience, if the mass transfer fails, sometimes this will work. And again, if you're working with us here at NameHero, we're always more than willing to troubleshoot it. But you can see it did work. Where we got an error here, it did come in with the single account. So now if I click Accounts, you can see where it failed here, demo cPanel 12, it did create. And so let's go take a look, make sure everything came over. SiteWorks account. And if I go to cPanel for this one, so comparing demo cPanel 12, demo cPanel 12. Once again, we can just start looking, so email overview that we have, it says one mailbox, just the default. And if I go in here, what do I have with email? I didn't have any, so I don't have to worry about that. MySQL database is what I have. I had one, and it had this kind of a long name. So what did I have over here? What came over, rather. Whoops. I want to see, compare these usernames. I just use this here because this will tell me. Yeah, so it brought over the correct database name, because I've also seen cases where this has been truncated. So it's not truncated. Everything looks good. Manage users. Do I have a user that matches? Yes. So the user is the same as the database. And if I go in cPanel, you know, these two are the same. So yes, it looks like that did come over, you know, the username and the database. So it looks like we're good there. Again, in File Manager. Go to cPanel File Manager just to compare. Okay, so here is the InterWorx File Manager. Click Public HTML and another WordPress site. cPanel, go into Public HTML and another WordPress site. Okay, so we know from our previous one, where did my file manager go? Right here, that we need to change our localhost in the config file. So while we're in here, we'd want to go ahead and click this, and we wanted to change this. Remember, instead of using localhost, we want to change it to 127.0.0.1. And I'll put, don't worry, I'll move this on the next screen and show you it a little bit larger and save it. Okay, so that's been edited. Now, if we go to cPanel, and let me get out of File Manager, go back to here. Let's look at Softaculous, WordPress. You can see this one was also in Softaculous. So click the pencil, make sure we have these details. Go back to InterWorx, or SiteWorks rather, and go to Softaculous. Let's put them here together. And you can see it does not carry over. Okay, so we agree to the license. We can click Overview. And we can go to Import right here. And we want to match up the stuff here, make sure it matches. So we're using, in our demo, HTTP and the domain, no subfolder. So HTTP, our domain, there's no subfolder, leave it blank. Import, and this just checks it and sees if it can't pull it. Congratulations, imported. So now if I return to Overview, you can see I see it all in here. And if I just go back here, it looks like this, right? So I've got everything looks like it matches up correctly. Now to verify, I can click this pencil and I can look, you know, here's my new file structure. Here is my domain, here's my database user and pass. I can look and see if these passwords match or not, you know, which they do. And instead of localhost, remember, we changed this in the config file. So you can kind of look on your browser now to make sure 127.0.0.1, whereas this one was localhost. And it works all well. Now, I can go down here and just click Save. You know, I didn't change anything, but just Save. And if I had a connection error, it would tell me. So this tells me that Softaculous is making a successful connection to the database, and I'm all set. You know, I'm good to go. And the final thing that I check would be my PHP version. So go back to SiteWorks. Under domains, I would go to PHP options, click edit, 7.1. Or I can see it right here too, just right here on the right in this table. And if I go to cPanel, I'd verify that as well. And multi-PHP manager, 7.1. So you can see where the mass import failed, the single account worked. One final thing I'll show. Inside of NodeWorx, you can see, if you remember, when we did our, when we did our other mass transport, it would not let me change over the primary domain. And that's because it was already created. So if I have an account already created, back to accounts, so in my example, keydiets.com, and this is my primary domain, and I've already created it because it was my primary domain. So I created it, but I didn't put any files in it. And I want to restore the data from cPanel. All right, so let's go into cPanel and try it this way. Let me close out some of these windows here so we don't get too much going and get confused. Web Host Manager. Okay, keydiets.com. So we'll go to cPanel. We're going to get a backup again. Backup. Download a full account backup. Okay, now you can see I already have one in here. You want to make sure this is fresh though. But then again, you do have the option if you want to send it to a remote server. Let's see if I can't demonstrate this really quick, and I'm not sure if this will work or not, so we'll see. I hate doing things just on the fly sometimes, but we'll try it out. So let's see if we can't just create an FTP account inside of SiteWorks for this specifically. So if we go down here to FTP, go to accounts, I'm going to create one, just Ryan Test, generate, here's my password. What we're going to do is try to send one to here. So our home directory is home key diets. That's where everything lives. So let's just try to send it to here and see what happens. Home key diets, where this account has access to. All right, so let's go back into here. Use ryan@keydiets.com. My password, default port. Let's see, /home/keydiets. It might just do it in the default directory for this FTP, but we'll try it out here. Like this. The remote server, we are going to use the IP address of the InterWorx server. Let's see if this connects. Failed to transport, login incorrect. Oh, that's great. So, oh, it's because I made it Ryan Test. Again, that's why I don't like to do things on the fly. We're in a hurry. So we will send this to a remote FTP server. Oh, we can just use passive mode. What the heck? Let's see if that. All right, user. I've got to change our password because I've already lost that. Copy this, save. And remote server, password, port 21. And we will use the IP. Send. Let's just see if it puts it in that by default. All right, so it's sending now a backup to the server automatically. So if I go back to SiteWorks, you can see for this account, it gives it access to this home directory. So I'm curious to see if that's where that backup's going to go. I think it should. If I go to File Manager, yes, there it is. You can see it's already here. And this is why it would be important to put an email address in here, so we would know for sure that it completed, because sometimes, you know, if it's large, it would take a while. So make sure you put your email on that so you're not seeing a backup that's not complete. But I do see that. I do see this backup. And if I click it, it might try to download it. Let's see. Let's look at download Symlink. I can do a bunch of different things with it. Let's go to, let's just, we're going to say home key diets and take it that way. So let's just copy this file name. And it just uncompressed it. Let's go back here. See, their file manager is a little bit of a pain in the butt to get through. I'm just going to go back into it. So let's click it. I just want to copy it. Copy. Okay. All right, so let's go back into InterWorx. Now this is it's already created. We just grabbed a backup from cPanel, and we're going to go to import, a single account import instead of mass. This is my root domain, so I own it. I don't have any other resellers. Next. So instead of uploading this, I'm going to use a file that's already on my system, /home/keydiets/ the backup name. And I know to make sure I remove any extra spaces, and you can see I just deleted /. All right, so here's my location. Once again, we got this from the location of where this FTP account is that we created. You know, Ryan Test, if we click Edit, you can see the home directory is right here. And you can click there and it shows a structure or whatnot. But you can also verify it by here. So we didn't define this in cPanel, it just went there. Okay, so that's where the file is. It's good. It's a cPanel file. Now we have our IP option. We only have one IP, so we don't have to worry about that. The database, localhost. Next. If we account, if a site works exists on this domain for okay, so this is telling us that if this exists, which it does, this is going to overwrite everything. So by forewarning, if you're doing this, it will overwrite your data. So please be careful. This is assuming you don't have any data on it. Import. And we're letting it do its thing here. Taking a little bit longer. I'm a little bit curious. So it looks like to me what it's doing is yes, that worked. So what it did was it took the backup that we had uploaded and then threw it over into a transfer folder and then recreated everything. So now if I go into my SiteWorks accounts, key diets, you can see that was imported. So if I go back to where my errors were, you can remember down here, well, we couldn't even import key diets, so it was not on there. So we resolved this error by doing it manually, or a single import. We resolved the primary domain by doing single import. And then we would also try this one. And I'm not going to bore you with going through another one. I think you get the idea. You know, we want to go back through and try this as a single import. But if we look in here, we can see key diets. Now we'd want to go through the same process that we already did. Click SiteWorks, you know, could go in and compare them. You can see there's definitely disk usage, but secondary domains, if I click that, you can see I had a subdomain in the key diets. So, you know, that's interesting. We could go back here and look just for an example. Subdomains. And you can see I did have a subdomain as well. So it brought over subdomains as well as the databases, or we could check it all, but I'm assuming everything is going to be there. But secondary domains, this is what SiteWorks calls add-on domains. It is important to note too that when it's coming from cPanel, the subdomains from cPanel are created as secondary. If I click subdomain, I don't see any subdomains. So these are actually, if they came over from cPanel, they're going to be listed as secondary. So just keep that in mind. That's something that I did notice as well. One thing I do like about SiteWorks that makes it extremely easy is you can see both the versions of PHP on the subdomain and the root domain. So, you know, if you wanted to use different, you could easily do that, which you can do that in cPanel too, but I think InterWorx makes it a little bit easier. So that's how you migrate over your accounts inside of NodeWorx. There is command line tools, which I'm a fan of. I'm not going to highlight those in this video. I feel like it's already gotten quite long. So I'm going to leave it at that. The big things to look out for is, you know, try the mass import tool first. Large accounts, 500 megabytes or over a gig, you know, maybe try those one by one instead of selecting them all. When you do it, if you run into errors, then try a single site import. If you run into issues when you're connecting to the mass import tool, make sure that SSH path is, or SSH password authentication is enabled. You know, if you have Web Host Manager, and I'll show you this, if I type in SSH and look at password auth tweak, if this is disabled, it won't connect because it's using a password to connect. So I would need to make sure this says it's enabled. If I've customized the SSH port, I need to define that in my host name, you know, colon, whatever the port is. If I still have errors connecting, then I might need to temporarily disable the firewall. And I might need to do it on both ends. You know, if I disable it on my server I'm coming from and it still doesn't connect, then maybe I need to disable it on my InterWorx server. So those are just some common troubleshooting things that I've seen that'll make sure that you can connect and then use that mass transfer tool. But you can see it did pretty good. This one we resolved by doing a single account. We got the primary domain by doing the single account. And so this one here, we would now try the single account. But we would want to go through each one of these and make sure that we're modifying our config files to reflect the new database host as well as the home directory for the files. So if you have any questions on this, feel free to let us know. You know, our team is standing by to help you out, and you know, we're more than willing to, you know, troubleshoot or diagnose some of these issues, you know, if you see this stuff. But it's not that complicated. You know, is it a little bit of a pain in the butt? Yeah, migrations are never fun. But it is for the most part, not too bad. We're not uploading a bunch of files. Using their integration import system, we can pretty quickly send stuff around, without having to download everything via FTP and re-upload. I mean, that would really take a long time. And again, it does bring in your emails and it brings in your files and your databases. So, for the most part, it is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. I haven't seen anything yet that cannot be worked through. So if you have any questions, let us know. But thanks a bunch for using us here at NameHero.com.